The concept of justice often gets depicted as a pair of scales. It's meant to represent a fair, impartial weighing of the evidence, where all parties are held to the same standards. Justice can be uncomfortable and elusive. Some of us might instinctively want to push for special leniency when we, or the people we love, transgress against others, and push for special severity when people transgress against us. Given the chance to reflect, fair-minded folks will concede that holding people to different standards defeats the whole concept of justice. But some folks are forcefully determined to tip the moral scales, consistently minimizing their own guilt and smearing the moral image of innocent parties. A prime example would be narcissists, unyieldingly self-absorbed and callous to the needs and feelings of others. But even otherwise fair-minded individuals can have their moral sense drawn off balance by a distorting influence. For example, if they're recruited by a dogmatic ideological group. To mistreat people while maintaining a sense of moral righteousness calls for some hefty conceptual distortions. Joe is a narcissist who becomes romantically involved with Mo. After a short-lived honeymoon stage, Joe becomes increasingly abusive, throwing insults and false accusations. Mo tries to explain to Joe that these aggressive outbursts are harming the relationship. In response, Mo is accused of being a control freak who has no respect for people's freedom of expression. Joe asserts, "You're no better than me." Joe's attempting a form of psychological manipulation known as leveling. This is where a person or group whose conduct is significantly worse than another on any objective analysis of the situation tries to assert equal moral standing, claiming a false equivalence in the conduct of both parties by adding bogus elements to their opponent's side and denying awkward elements on their own side. Joe is trying to draw a false equivalence between objecting to abuse and being abusive. Narcissists often make leveling statements when they're confronted with inescapable evidence of their abuse. They might claim there are faults on both sides. Of course, no one's devoid of faults, but the insinuation here is that both parties' faults have equal weight, which is sometimes far from true. They might claim there are two sides to every story. Again, the insinuation is that both sides have an equally valid perspective. They might claim they and the person they've abused just see things differently, implying that whether or not abuse has occurred is just a matter of perception. In all cases, the aim is to blur responsibility and thereby avoid it. The hypocrisy of these leveling statements becomes even clearer when it's the narcissist complaining about being wronged. Try telling them there's two sides to every story, but stand well back first. Language is all about effective communication. It expands to allow us to describe our experiences with greater precision. For example, killing is divided into subcategories like murder, justifiable homicide, and assisted suicide, in recognition of the huge differences in circumstance and motive. Language allows us to distinguish different quantities as well as qualities. We'd get in a real mess if, whenever we ordered soup in a restaurant, we got 14 bowls when we wanted one. But that's the kind of mess leveling and false equivalences produce. They corrupt language, blurring quantities and confusing concepts, and they come at us from all directions. Frauds who peddle fake medicine often claim it's just an equally valid alternative to scientifically authenticated treatments. They do indefensible harm to people in desperate positions who often end up not pursuing effective treatments. In some misguided couples therapy and mediation, the idea of making judgments about behavior is practically taboo. Deliberate abuse might get reframed as miscommunication or a personality clash. This kind of overzealous emphasis on neutral language encourages leveling. When dogmatic political groups declare, "You're either with us or against us," they falsely equate legitimate selective criticism with total opposition. On the flip side, support is falsely equated only with total uncritical approval. Many of us are familiar with intolerant individuals and groups who've grown very comfortable persecuting other people whose only offense is being different from them. But when their persecution is challenged, They claim they're being persecuted and that their opponents are being just as intolerant. These are examples of what could be called hawk and dove interactions. The hawk selfishly aggresses against others, while the dove acts to reduce that selfishness and aggression and promote fairness. These are not equivalent positions, and hawks only add to their unreasonable behavior by claiming that doves are no better. Some folks who construct false equivalence fail to realize that by adding bogus baggage to their opponent's side, they can end up adding it to their own. This happens when atheism is falsely equated with religion, as some religious theists persist in doing. Of course, atheism bears no resemblance to religion. It's just a lack of belief in the existence of gods. It has no doctrine, no ritual, no system of worship, no symbolism, no scripture, no mythology, no sacred objects or concepts, no faith. Anthropologist Clifford Geertz gives one of the loosest available definitions of religion, describing it as a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, persuasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations, formulating conceptions of a general order of existence, and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. Still coming nowhere near atheism. It's instructive to note that theism isn't a religion either. You can believe gods exist without being a member of any religion. Theism shares some overlap with the theistic definition of religion, the belief in a superhuman controlling authority. Nonetheless, it doesn't qualify as a religion. And if theism doesn't qualify, how can atheism possibly qualify? Atheism and religion are foundationally different things. Some atheists have built up a large body of refutations against flawed arguments and claims for the existence of gods, but refuting arguments and claims doesn't amount to doctrine or faith. It's just a response to other people's attempts at persuasion. Calling atheism a religion is a false equivalence, designed to level a non-level playing field. It's often done to try and saddle atheists who make no truth claims with a false burden of proof to match the burden of proof on religious claims, or to try and make both religion and atheism seem like faith positions, when atheism isn't. The attempt to level atheism and religion as false equivalence fails, but it's worse than that. Religious theists are only theists in relation to the gods of their own faith. In regard to every other god, they're atheists. If not believing in gods was a separate religion in and of itself, that would mean these theists were practicing two religions, their own faith and the religion of their non-belief in all other gods. This is the kind of mess people get into when they start trying to level the playing field with false equivalence. It is interesting when certain religious people use labels like religion and faith in mocking ways. Have you ever heard a scientist or skeptic try to belittle religions by referring to them as scientific or skeptical? The one-sidedness here is quite revealing. Using words like religion and faith as pejorative leveling terms only serves to undermine religion. Some try to equate atheism with totalitarian ideologies like Stalinism, and they fail for exactly the same reason as those who try to belittle atheism with the label of religion. Atheism is not an ideology. It has no system of doctrines. Simply being an atheist is no predictor of your moral values. Some people, including folks who really should know better, have tried to equate the violent, immoral excesses of certain non-theistic totalitarian regimes with secular humanism. Secular humanism is naturalistic, rejecting supernatural views of reality. And it does have a set of organizing principles. But its principles diametrically oppose the principles of totalitarian ideologies. Secular humanism emphasizes fairness, well-being, meaningful living, democracy, and emancipation from systems of high control. It champions the value of reason, evidence, skepticism, scientific methodology, and free inquiry, unobstructed by religious or political correctness. Equating secular humanism with totalitarian regimes only reveals a lack of understanding. People who use false equivalences to downplay their own violence often perform the most elaborate verbal and mental gymnastics to dress up their barbaric practices as respectable or even noble. In April 2019, the Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, presented to the European Parliament what he referred to as an aide-memoire to explain the implementation of his country's Sharia Penal Code Order, or SBCO. In the document, Bolkiah sought to defend his decision to introduce stoning to death as punishment for adultery and anal sex, alongside amputation for theft. He declared these punishments were not man-made, but ordained by the Islamic deity Allah, a bizarre claim to present to non-Muslims who don't believe Allah exists. The fundamental nature of theistic religions is that they all operate by appealing to an authority that no one outside the religion recognizes. Point 1 of the document states, "Strong religious values with rich heritage of tradition and culture form the very foundation of the unique Bruneian identity, loving, peaceful and respectful community, which are important to be preserved, and hence the country is fondly known as the abode of peace. Promoting laws that advocate the sadistic killing of consenting sexual partners while touting yourself as loving, peaceful and respectful is classic levelling, erasing the brutality from the picture as if it didn't exist." When we hear the title Abode of Peace, what expectations come to mind? Imagine two societies. In Society A, the laws of the land make no moral sense. They forbid a range of harmless activities and dispense unequal freedoms to different subgroups. Secret law enforcement agents mingle anonymously among the population. Disobedient citizens are seized in the night and taken away to await execution. In Society B, citizens enjoy equal freedoms and receive a moral education that fosters empathy, compassion and respect. Laws are transparent, minimal, and confined to cases of clearly identifiable abuse. Transgressions are addressed with an emphasis on restitution and rehabilitation. Outwardly, people's behaviour in both societies is strikingly similar. Crime is equally rare, and public displays of respect and civility are the overwhelming norm. Would we consider both societies abodes of peace? Is a social foundation of violent coercion equivalent to one of voluntary cooperation? Is peace just about superficially smooth social order, even if it's achieved through fear and oppression? If our definitions of peace don't match, we could be in for some nasty surprises when we find ourselves in an abode of peace. Bolkiah's definition of peace remains in question. Point 8 of the Bolkiah document states, "The SPCO aims to respect and protect the legitimate rights of all individuals." This is more dishonest, levelling language. Bolkiah paints himself as respectful and protective of individual rights, while he implements laws that grossly disrespect and violate individuals. Point 9 states, "The Sharia criminal law system focuses more on prevention than punishment, and its aim is to educate, deter, rehabilitate, and nurture." Trying to equate death threats with education, rehabilitation, or nurturing is again a perversion of language. Point 10 states, "The SPCO does not criminalize nor has any intention to victimize a person's status based on sexual orientation or belief, including same-sex relations." As members of Brunei's gay community have pointed out, when your neighbours are encouraged to believe you deserve to be stoned to death, you become less human in their eyes. Bolkiah's claim that there was no intent to harm status is more hollow levelling, showing him to be staggeringly obtuse or staggeringly disingenuous. Point 10 goes on to state, "The criminalisation of sodomy is to safeguard the sanctity of family lineage and marriage of individual Muslims, especially women." In fact, criminalising forms of sex violates the sanctity of relationships by trying to dictate what consenting adults can and can't do with each other. It's intrusive and infantilizing to all adults, regardless of gender. Point 12 states that the sentences of hard, stoning to death and amputation imposed for offences of theft, robbery, adultery and sodomy have extremely high evidentiary thresholds, requiring no less than 2 or 4 men of high moral standing and piety as witnesses. A government could introduce a death penalty for whistling on a Tuesday and claim it'll only implement the death penalty if the evidence for the whistling is really high. Standards of evidence aren't the issue here. It's the barbaric nature of the punishments and the fact that harmless behaviour has been irrationally criminalised. Bolkiah uses the phrase men of high moral standing to give the impression of virtue, but men of high morals would have nothing to do with these barbaric laws. Maybe the most disingenuous statements by Bolkiah were made in point 3 of his April document, which read, "It must be appreciated that the diversities in culture, tradition, and religious values in the world means that there is no one standard that fits all." Superficially, Bolkiah appears to promote an appreciation of diversity, but his actions don't match his words. By imposing Islamic law on non-Muslims, he denies them religious freedom. Bolkiah calls for tolerance, respect, and understanding from others, but fails to demonstrate these qualities himself. In early May of 2019, days after the document's publication, it was widely reported that Bolkiah said he wouldn't enforce the death penalty, following a global backlash against his legislation. What he actually said was there'd be a moratorium on the death penalty, which just means a temporary postponement or prohibition. He also stated there were many questions and misperceptions about the implementation of the SPCO, and that once these were cleared, the merit of the law would be evident. Bolkiah's statement isn't the reassuring message some have interpreted it to be. All he's said is that there'll be a temporary period of no implementation while misperceptions are corrected, after which time he expects the law to be widely recognized as praiseworthy. Let's examine the use of this word, misperceptions. This is a common gaslighting technique. When abusers want to deny their abuse, they'll often claim their actions have been misunderstood or misperceived. Rather than admitting and correcting their harmful behavior, they try to get us to question our perceptions of it. But stoning people to death for having sex is not some cryptic concept ordinary people have trouble understanding, and maintaining barbaric laws under a temporary suspension is not equivalent to abolishing those laws. Bolkiah doesn't have some special insight here, which we'd all agree with if only we just perceived it in the right way. His proposals are morally reprehensible, and his attempts to defend them are hypocritical, dishonest, and manipulative. Brunei's been heading into extremism for some time. These recently implemented punishments are only the newest phase in the application of its 2013 Sharia Penal Code Order, which has been introduced in stages. Around 5 years ago, Bolkiah began phasing in death sentences for apostasy, adding Brunei to the list of countries where being an ex-Muslim is a capital offence. It's been suggested that Bolkiah's introduction of Sharia is just an attempt to attract business from wealthy Islamic nations, and that secretly he has no intention of ever enforcing it. But if that was true, what happens when he dies? What if one of his successors decides to activate all the legislation he's so helpfully put in place? Introducing these laws has put lives at risk. It's been sobering to watch these backward steps into ignorance and brutality. But backwards is the predictable direction of individuals and ideologies that falsely equate innocence with guilt and vice with virtue. It's important to keep distinct concepts separate and not allow them to be blurred by false equivalences. It's only by accurately reflecting reality that we can build fairness into our interactions and our moral systems. As long as we take care to challenge flaws and prejudices in our thinking, making judgments about behavior is completely appropriate and not something to avoid. Evaluating behavior, our own as well as other people's, is how we develop a moral sense. Not all attitudes and behavior are morally equal. Some are worse than others and deserve criticism. Trying to equalize unequal attitudes and behavior because of self-serving motives or a fixation with appearing non-judgmental degrades our moral compasses. In this era of weaponized manipulative tactics, if we want to move closer to truth and justice, it pays to be extremely mindful of leveling and false equivalence.